In March 1999 in Hong Kong, a young woman called Fan Man-yee went missing. After more than a month, the brutal circumstances of Fan's disappearance were brought to light, and what happened to her was one of the most horrific crimes to have ever taken place in Hong Kong. This particular crime was given the name of the Hello Kitty murder. Hey there little berries and newberries, it's Berry here. Welcome if you are new and welcome back if you are not. I hope you are all well. Before diving into the case, I just want to give a new disclaimer, which is going to be that this is intended for educational purposes to raise awareness of real crimes, and as much effort has been possible to ensure accuracy during my online research, but corrections will be welcome if required. As this is a true crime video, there are subjects contained within that may be disturbing to some viewers, particularly with this case. It is very disturbing, so discretion is strongly advised. Fan Man-yee had a very, very hard life. She had a harder life than a lot of people. She was born in China, just outside of Hong Kong, in around 1976 to 75. Not long after she was born, her family abandoned her. They either decided they didn't want her or they couldn't afford to have her, so she was placed into an all-girls orphanage in Hong Kong, where she remained until she was 15 years old. At this orphanage, she was subjected to physical and emotional abuse, poor hygiene, very poor education. The girls in the school were not really given that many skills or resources once they were due to leave in order to go and live their lives. When Fan was 15, she was essentially kicked out of the orphanage. She was told, "You're too old, we need the space for a smaller, younger infant. You're old enough now to fend for yourself, go." And that was it. She was left to fend for herself on the streets of Hong Kong with no money, no education, no family, no friends, nothing. She was homeless. It's no surprise that Fan turned to prostitution, and she also became addicted to drugs because of all the pain that she'd been through. In Hong Kong, it is legal to be a sex worker, illegal to be a pimp or a madam. So Fan Man-yee worked in Hong Kong as a sex worker legitimately herself for around 5 or 6 years. She then at the age of 21 started working in a brothel called Romance Villa. It was through her work at the Romance Villa that she met a man called Chi-Yuen, and I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. I apologise if I mispronounce anything in this video. I'm not very good at pronunciations. They fell in love and they actually got married. So you'd think that Fan, after all these years of heartache and loss, she finally had someone to love her and whom she could love. But their relationship was volatile, and it wasn't helped at all by the fact that they were both drug addicts. The neighbours attested to the fact that they could hear arguments all hours in the middle of the night, and Ning was actually very abusive to Fan Man-yee, so she was a victim of domestic abuse and violence. Fan soon gave birth to a little boy in around November 1998, and this event in her life gave Fan a whole new outlook. For the first time in her life, there was someone to whom she was biologically related. And not only that, someone to whom she was 100% accountable. A lot of people say that when they have a child, they have a whole new perspective and outlook on life, different motivations in life. And Fan knew that she had to turn her life around to give a better life for her son. She had to stop working as a prostitute, she had to quit drugs, and that's exactly what she did. That was a few months into her son's birth, and the arguments between her and her husband still continued, so she decided that this marriage wasn't for her. It was not good for her or her son. So the two of them separated, and I'm not sure exactly what happened with her son, whether he stayed with Fan Man-yee or with his father. But all I know is that Fan tried her best she did get off drugs. She tried her best to stay off drugs. But she found that working as a hostess at a nightclub, which is where she got a job before, was not as lucrative as working as a prostitute. She struggled. She really did struggle, and she cracked under the pressure. and unfortunately she fell back into drink and drugs. Now, remember what I said earlier about pimps and madams being illegal in Hong Kong, although sex workers were legal? The way that pimps would get around this is that they would buy apartments and rooms, they would rent the rooms to sex workers, and they would charge them sort of double as much as they would charge for rent. So they basically were taking in a portion of the women's earnings. And this was no different with Fan Man-yee. She became a prostitute again, but she had a room. She had like a small apartment. Whether her son was with her or not, I'm not sure if there was shared custody, but either way, she tried to get some more money coming in for her son, but unfortunately to feed her drug habit, which regrettably had restarted. In around January or February 1999, Fan Man-yee met a client called Chan Man-lok, who became a regular client of hers. However, Chan was more than just a client. It's unclear whether or not he was actually Fan's pimp, but he was a pimp. He was also a drug dealer and a gangster. He was a mafia boss in something called the Triad, which was the crime syndicate in Hong Kong. Chan was a dangerous man. He'd been involved in crime since middle school. He also sometimes did crystal meth. Fan Man-yee was so hard up and so desperate to feed her habit and her son that she made a very, very bad decision. After Chan Man-lok had paid her a visit for her services, Fan saw his wallet in his jean pocket. She stole it, hid it under her mattress, and hoped that Chan Man-lok wouldn't notice that it had gone missing for a while and that he wouldn't think that she had stolen it. But when Chan Man-lok left Fan Man-yee's apartment to get some food, he found he couldn't pay because he didn't have his wallet. And it dawned on him. He last had it at Fan Man-yee's apartment because he paid her. And he realised Fan had taken it. So he stormed back to her apartment, banging on the door, and when she opened it, he practically pushed her inside. He kicked her and pulled her hair and said, "Where's my wallet?" Now, Fan Man-yee was understandably terrified. She knew who Chan was. Another YouTuber has observed this. I've seen this in another video where she could have easily said to him, "Look, you dropped it here. I was going to give it back to you when you next came around, but I had no way of contacting you." But Fan was honest. She got the wallet and said, "Yeah, I stole it. I'm ever so sorry." She hadn't touched any of the money within it, which was 400 Hong Kong dollars, which was roughly around 4,000 to 5,000 US dollars at the time. She begged for forgiveness, and Chan said that he'd let her off provided she paid him 10,000 Hong Kong dollars, which Fan did not have. Nowhere near that. She told him she would get it for him, but she needed time. He had no choice but to give her time. But he promised her that he'd be back very soon for his money. Fan Man-yee had no way to raise those funds doing what she was doing, working basically in an apartment brothel. So some sources say that she carried on working but saw more clients, or she turned to street prostitution. However, mid-March 1999, Fan Man-yee suddenly disappeared. Her estranged husband couldn't get in touch with her, nobody had seen her, her apartment was vacant, and she seemingly just left and didn't come back. And I've not been able to determine whether there was a missing persons report filed or if people were actively going and searching for her, or whether her husband, who was the only real next of kin that she had and they were estranged, whether he just felt that she'd suddenly abandoned everybody and just left and didn't bother doing anything. On the 24th of May, so just over 2 months after Fan Man-yee went missing, something very strange happened. A 14-year-old girl called Lau Min Fong, or sometimes known as Ah Fong, which probably isn't her real or legal name, walked into the Yau Ma Tei police station in Hong Kong, and she had a very bizarre story, a very bizarre request. She told the police that she needed help with a ghost. She said she was being haunted by the ghost of a woman with a bloody face who was begging her for help and just constantly tormenting her. This ghost wouldn't leave her alone. And the police were understandably like, what? You're coming to the police because you need help with a ghost? They just dismissed her. They said, nah. But she was insistent. Ah Fong just said to them, I need help with this. I need you to help me. And they said, okay, fine. Tell us. And she told them again, this ghost is haunting me, taunting me. It's a woman and, you know, she's all bloodied and beaten and I don't know what to do. And they just said, look, we're going to call your parents. And it was when they said they were going to call her parents that Ah Fong said, okay, I'll tell you the truth. She said that she wasn't being haunted by a ghost as much as she was being haunted by her conscience. She had extreme guilt about what she had done to a young woman, and she confirmed the name of the young woman was Fan Man-yee. Ah Fong had not only witnessed what had happened to Fan Man-yee, but had actually taken part in what actually ended Fan Man-yee's life. The haunting she was describing, as I said, was just her conscience. She wanted to come clean to stop Fan from haunting her. And it was at this point the police listened to Ah Fong. But the more Ah Fong spoke, they started to become incredulous again, thinking, what's going on here? Because what she was going to tell them was in itself as unbelievable as her being haunted by a ghost. According to Ah Fong, this is what happened to Fan Man-yee when she went missing on the 17th of March in 1999. After Fan Man-yee stole Chan Man-lok's wallet, she tried desperately to pay the money back. However, this was not quick enough for Chan Man-lok, and on the 17th of March in 1999, Fan Man-yee was abducted by Chan and two of his associates. She was taken to a rundown and dilapidated building in Granville Road in Hong Kong. Chan Man-lok's associates were Luang Wai-lun and Luang Shing-cho, so they were 21 and 26 years old respectively. Both were gangsters, and along with them, the 13-year-old Ah Fong. Fong was the girlfriend of Shing-cho, but clearly this was a case of a paedophile and her abuser. It's likely that she was also a prostitute, forced into it likely by Shing-cho or Chan Man-lok. At the apartment in Granville Road, Chan, the two Luangs and Ah Fong were drinking, consuming drugs. They began to kick and slap Fan, eventually progressing to beating her with bamboo sticks and metal bars. Fan Man-yee was imprisoned, and it was clear that Chan Man-lok had orchestrated the kidnapping to imprison her and pimp her out to men to pay off her debt. There in that apartment, Fan Man-yee was brutally and repeatedly raped by all three of her male captors, and they also beat her with metal bars. They melted both candle wax and also plastic straws on her feet and on her hands, so she couldn't physically walk away and she couldn't fight back. The men to whom Chan Man-lok would pimp her out to, they were told they could do anything they wanted to her. And normally a pimp would be very strict and would be very specific about what people can and cannot do to their sex workers. But Chan Man-lok said, anything goes. It's not clear whether the clients that attended the property actually ended up paying off Fan Man-yee's debt. Fan was beaten and abused, not just by Chan and the two Luangs. Ah Fong, although she was young, she was impressionable, she was clearly a victim. But she did actually willingly take part in the beatings and various tortures that took place. She later described it as being, quote, a fun atmosphere. At first, she was just made to watch, basically I think to desensitize her. This was part of her grooming. She was then told to participate, which she did at first reluctantly, but then she began to enjoy tormenting Fan. After just a couple of weeks, Fan Man-yee's body was in such a bad way that people who attended just didn't have any sexual interest in her, so man-lok actually lost the income. But he didn't care. He and the Tulawangs and Fong decided, do you know what, it's just fun to keep her around and do whatever we want to. They upped their game with the beatings. Her hands and feet were burnt further. She was hung from the ceiling, both from her wrists and from her ankles, sometimes left there for a whole day and night. She was used as a punching bag. They rubbed spices and hot sauces into her open wounds. They would torment her psychologically too. They would make her smile. They'd say smile and say thank you and say you're happy and that you deserve all these beatings that she was getting, and say that you enjoy it. You have to thank us for what we're doing. But of course, Fan Man-yee there's no way you can enjoy that. So they would just beat her harder. And it didn't just stop there. Now what I'm about to say is very gruesome, so I'm giving you forewarning, is they would also force Fan to consume urine and feces. Fong described in one incident where she admitted that she once defecated in a drawer and made Fan Man-yee eat all of it. Soon, waste was all she consumed, so she had no sustenance at all. Fan Man-yee was getting weaker and weaker. Once again, there are inconsistent stories online. Some say that the four captors left the apartment on the 15th of April in 1999 to get some food, and some say they were still there. They were in the apartment when this happened. They had locked Fan Man-yee in a bathroom, and that's basically where she really lived, but they locked her in there so she wouldn't get out. And when they went to get her in the morning, or when they came back from the restaurant, Fan Man-yee was dead. She was oozing pus everywhere from her wounds, and Ah Fong described her body as even though she hadn't been dead very long, she was alive when they last saw her, either earlier that day or the day before. It's almost as if she had rapidly began to decompose, or this rotting of her flesh had occurred even beforehand from all of the spices and oils that were being rubbed into her wounds and the beatings to which she had been subjected. Fong also said that man-lok was incensed. He was angry that Fan Man-yee had died, but not because he cared about her, but because he wanted to keep her there and keep beating and abusing her. For some reason, he somehow thought that he could do this to her for however long. He suspected that she had somehow died from a drug overdose, because they were doing drugs there, and I believe they either forced Fan Man-yee to take drugs, or she was given them and she took them because she was still addicted, or she was trying to numb the pain that she was in. But given how badly she'd been treated before she died, she most likely died from traumatic shock, bodily injuries, grievous bodily harm, or even septic shock. She already smelled very bad, so her body was actually already rotting away. So it's more likely than not that she succumbed to her injuries rather than die from an overdose. The fact that there was a dead body in this apartment was a huge dilemma for these four gangsters. They needed to dispose of her, and they needed to disguise the smell. To do this, they dismembered Fan Man-yee's body. They placed her body parts either in a fridge or on the stove, where they boiled her body parts so that the flesh would come away from the bones. They would then get rid of the boiled flesh and the bones. And this is really disgusting. They would use the same stove to cook their noodles as they would to boil Fan Man-yee's body parts. They would use the same pots, and I don't know whether they wash them, but they would use the same spoon to stir Fan Man-yee's body parts boiling away, and then use the same spoon at the same time to stir their noodles. Ugh. Now we're going to get onto something else that's quite gruesome, but this is what gives this case its name, the Hello Kitty murder. Fan Man-yee's body was cut into pieces, as I said, and one of her body parts that was severed was her head, so she was decapitated. Her head was placed in a boiling pot until the flesh had come off the bones. Fong said she found it very gruesome, she couldn't look, but then Shing-cho just told her to pretend she was watching television. And I think this is another way of anesthetizing her or desensitizing her to violence. Pretend you're watching television, pretend it's entertainment. Fong did, she looked at it and thought, I'm just watching a horror scene on telly, it's not real. So she was able to dissociate in that sense. After the flesh had been boiled from Fan's skull, her skull was taken out of the pot, and the gang grabbed a dirty and insect-infested Hello Kitty mermaid plush. They took the stuffing out of its head and sewed Fan Man-yee's skull into the doll. They then sewed it back up. Why they did that, I have no idea. They got rid of quite a lot of her other bones. They did keep one tooth and various organs in the fridge. But for some reason, they kept her skull in the Hello Kitty doll. After relaying this harrowing story, the police found what Fong told them to be so unbelievable. They weren't prepared to take her at face value. They wanted evidence. So Fong willingly took them to the apartment in Granville Road. They were skeptical, understandably. This is a very far out there story. But when Fong took them to the apartment, they found a fridge full of human organs, and they found the Hello Kitty mermaid plush with the skull sewn inside. And it was awful looking because even though the flesh had come off the bones, brain matter was still present. This was just really gruesome, and it was described in some sites as scarring the officers for life. The organs were found, as I said, and the one single tooth that they kept. So they kept these trophies. It's unclear what they were going to do with them. Superimposing of the skull with Fan Man-yee's pictures, because I do believe she was reported missing, confirmed that this was indeed the body of Fan Man-yee, but not all of her body parts have been found. With Fong's help, the police tracked down the 3 other captors: man-lok, wai-lun, and shing-cho. They showed no remorse, no regard for their actions, and they refused to talk about what they did. Almost all of the information that the police had came from Fong and from what they gathered at the apartment. Due to the body not being complete or intact, they couldn't actually find a definitive cause of death, but they did suspect she either died from an overdose because drugs were there, or she had succumbed to the beatings and the torture. So therefore there was a lack of intention, there was a lack of mens rea here, so they couldn't prove that this was actually a case of murder. The men told the police that Fan Man-yee was indeed working as a prostitute there with them, but she did so willingly. And she just overdosed one day on her own. They didn't see her until the next day, and they just panicked and got rid of her body. However, it was obvious that Fan Man-yee had been subjected to brutal beatings and abuse. She was not there willingly, and whether or not she was beaten to death or died from an overdose, she died on those men's watches, and she was imprisoned against her will. Fong was granted total immunity from any wrongdoing she did. She was a willing participant in this. She was young, I'm sorry, but at 13, nearly 14, you're old enough to know right from wrong. But her testimony, which she gave in great detail, she had to give in massive detail in order to secure convictions for these 3 men, meant that she then went into foster care. I believe it's likely that she has changed her name and that she's likely in witness protection now, because these 3 men could well target her for her giving her evidence against them. I do give Fong credit for coming forward and testifying, but there's a part of me that can't help but feel that she did it for herself, to alleviate the guilt for herself rather than for Fan Man-yee's sake and for her son's sake. All three men were tried, but due to the lack of evidence of the cause of death and the lack of mens rea, they were convicted of manslaughter rather than murder, and also imprisonment. They were sentenced to life with a minimum term of 20 years. What is interesting is that only a few years before this case, Hong Kong had only just been returned to China. It was previously under British rule. Hong Kong is technically part of China, but it exists as a state separate to China. It has its own laws. Hong Kong did not have a death penalty. It's been observed that if this had happened in China, in mainland China, these three men would have got the death penalty. Fan Man-yee's estranged husband came forward and expressed his pleasure at the sentencing, but commented that he could never forgive or forget. Fong was taken into foster care. Her whereabouts now are unknown. The three men did appeal their sentences. They appealed their convictions, but they were, for the most part, unsuccessful. Wai-lun and man-lok were unsuccessful in their appeals. Shing-cho did successfully appeal his sentence, and it was reduced from life with a minimum of 20 years to 18 years, I believe, at a maximum. And he was actually released in April 2014, and he has not reformed his ways, because in December 2021, he sexually assaulted a 10-year-old girl. Now, not forgetting that Shing-cho was the so-called boyfriend of Ah Fong, who was half his age at the time and underage. In August last year, he was imprisoned for 12 months for this crime. So he's either out of prison now or he'll soon be getting out of prison. As for the other two, Man-lok and Wai-lun, their statuses are unknown. They possibly are still in prison. They have now served their minimum time of 20 years if they still are, because they were convicted in the year 2000. Unless they show genuine remorse, unless they show that they have been rehabilitated, I doubt they're ever going to get out of prison. Now, I don't know what Shing-cho did to get out of prison early, but sometimes people without any empathy or remorse can easily fake rehabilitation. So I'm hoping they are still in prison. In 2004, Fan's skull was cremated and her ashes were actually turned over to her biological family. They were tracked down and her fate was made clear to them. But they were the ones who, of course, abandoned her. If they'd never abandoned her, then she would never have been in this situation. She would never have been brought up in an orphanage. She never would have turned to the streets. Highly unlikely anyway. And it's likely she would have been living in China where her family were from. As for her son, he was only a baby when she died, I think a year or less than a year old. In the fridge where all of her body parts were, a necklace that belonged to Fan Man-yee was found. The necklace was cleaned up and it was handed over to her son. It has been speculated that Fan's estranged husband and son are now living in Singapore. Wherever they are, I hope they're happy. The apartment in Granville Road, it was number 31. It was demolished in 2012 after multiple reports of hauntings and a lack of interest in habitation when people found out what went on there. I've also heard from other sources that every year on the anniversary of Fan's death, a memorial takes place to her. But the hotel that was actually built on the same site in 2016 has 3 Buddha portraits there in memory of Fan Man-yee, because we really need to remember her and keep her story alive. She tried. She really tried. She struggled given where she was in a bustling city with nothing. What else could she have done? She had no family, no friends, no care, nothing. She did have a son. She brought a son into the world and she tried to do her best for him. And one mistake she made cost her life. But that was in no way her fault. None of that was her fault. Thank you very much for watching this, my little berries. I love you all dearly, and I want to say thank you very much to my lovely Newberries, my members, Alison Hempstead, Checking Convictions, Reality Check, Candy Ray, Denty and Shaz, and Alf. Thank you very, very much. I really do appreciate your support. I would really love it if you would consider becoming a member. It's $2.99 a month, and I am giving my Newberries early access and members only posts and some members only videos. So I really hope you are well wherever you are, and I would love you all to just take a moment to remember Fan Man-yee and the importance of support, the importance of making sure people are looked after. And I cannot emphasize this enough, important to not treat your fellow humans like shit. This case makes me so angry, it really does. Just, oh my god. I wish you all the very best, everybody, and I would like to say take care and mwah.